Started.
All right. So welcome everyone.
Recording in
Welcome.
progress.
Oh, welcome everyone. This is Storytelling and Comics. My name's Matt McEwan.
And I'm Michelle Stanford.
I'm gonna just tab over here. Uh, in case anyone wants to find our stuff, this is our link trees. You can scan the code, screenshot it for later, whatever
Yeah.
you like. At the end, we'll have it up as well, so don't worry about that. But we're both webcomic artists, and I've been making comics since 2019.
Yeah. And yeah, we're both comic artists based out here in Los Angeles. And I have been making comics since, well, gosh, like middle school, but I have been publishing my comics Centralia 2050 online since 2015.
That's right.
So
And
both been making comics and making comics together for a very long time.
I'm getting notifications on my screen trying to get rid of. Sorry about that. All right.
Ah.
So, yeah, tell us a little bit about Centralia.
Okay. So my comic, Centralia 2050, is a cyberpunk mystery comic. It is about this girl, Midori, who finds herself in this big, sprawling metropolis with no memories of her own. But what she does have is a psychic connection to a missing child. So the story follows her as she goes to uncover, the mystery of the city, the catastrophic blackout that happened, and find why are there so many missing people, and what does she have to do with this one missing girl?
That's right. And as
And
she
Matt,
kind
your
of,
comic?
yeah. And my comic is Ruin. I have started a mini comic and then I did first chapter. I'm working on the second chapter now, but also I'm retooling a lot of things. So taking a little bit of a long hiatus there. Coming back to it now, but it's about a boy who lives in a world with spirits and humans and these monsters called horrors, and he's the only person that anyone knows of that can still speak to the spirits and see them. Otherwise, everyone else, finds them to be invisible or they don't believe in them anymore. So he goes on this journey to kind of find out why this disconnection happened, and through his journey, he finds out, the history of that world and tries to figure out a way to restitch things back together to the way that they were.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, let's see. Today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a piece of Michelle's script and kind of going step by step on how you go from a piece of script to a finished scene. And we'll take a small detour in between where we'll talk about composition
Hmm.
and line and all that kind of stuff with the overarching, I guess, premise that every step of the way through the comic process is an opportunity for you to inject emotion and story into your comic. It's not just, oh, I'm just going through line art, I'm going through color or whatever. I'm actually trying to capture something each step of the
Right.
way.
And that's kind of the premise, the idea of our whole panel, because I feel like it's very easy to go online and find, a rudimentary kind of step by step. Here is literally how you make a comic. Here's how you put panels and words and pictures. And I think that's all great. But what I find is harder to kind of convey and find is how do you really take every step and make it communicate the story you're trying to tell, the emotions you're trying to tell. So we're going to go through and starting with this little bit of script, we're just going to kind of talk about how every step is an opportunity to convey those emotions, that story in ways that go beyond just literally, um, words that characters are saying in a panel.
Right.
So Matt, if we want to, okay, right.
Yeah,
So
so we're gonna
here-
just take this small section here of the script. We're not gonna do the whole page, but Michelle, will you just read out this part of the script?
yeah, and then so just, real quick, this is how I like to format my scripts. I put the page number at the very top. Since I'm the artist, I don't need to write a very detailed description. If you are a writer and you're working with an artist, I'd say put as much details as you want to see on the page. Some people like to put, less description and kind of put it in their artist's hands to handle it. But So here, I'll just get into it. We have cut to the exterior of a Skyrail train as it makes its way across Centralia's downtown area. And then we're going to go to an interior. We see Midori and Gray, our main characters, in a crowded afternoon train car. We have Midori sitting with a bandaged leg slightly outstretched. She's just fitting herself between the other patrons, looking out the window at passing scenery, her listless gaze reflected back at her as she's lost in thought. Gray is standing in front of her, holding onto one of the train car poles. Monitors line the upper corners of the car amidst the ones displaying ads or the next stops. Some monitors are playing a news broadcast. And we have, the only dialogue we've got on this page is going to be, or at least in these panels, is going to be coming from the TV. So I think let's go to the next slide and we can, this is the first step of the process. And already here, we can start making our narrative decisions. So I have three takes on each of these panels we're going to draw. So first is this exterior of the sky rail. It's like a elevated kind of like maglev train going through the city. And, I've got three different kind of views here. Do we want to see it kind of soaring above? Are we kind of like looking slightly more eye level at it as it cruises over the city? We've also got one where we're kind of above it, looking down as it's coming towards camera, and one where we're really down below, looking up as if we're on the street level. So, those different positions where you put yourself can kind of create a different psychological effect for the viewer. Like, where are they kind of seeing themselves in the scene? Same for these next panels here. So, like it said in the previous one, we've got Midori sitting, and we're seeing her flanked between two people, and we've got Gray standing here. He's holding onto a
Yeah.
pole.
And you've kind of had the main characters here. You made sure even in the simple thumbnail that you can tell like where you're placing them, as
Yes.
opposed to like the kind of bystander characters, which is
Right.
nice.
Yeah, and obviously you see like I'm keeping these very, very loose, That's the idea of a thumbnail is right now we're just exploring the different possibilities of compositions and which one is going to really get across the mood that we want. So, ultimately the one that I go with at like for number panel number 2, for example, I didn't feel like the third one there was quite giving that kind of claustrophobic, closed in feeling that I wanted. What I ended up on is something, yeah, kind of between 1 and 2, where we've got these, nice foreground shapes kind of framing our characters in, making them feel a bit small because in this moment it's, they're feeling a little less confident, they're feeling a little insignificant, a little lost in the crowd in the city. And then
Yeah.
for 3, this is the monitor shot of the TV. So it's just kind of a decision here of, well, how much of the characters' heads do we maybe want to see in this shot? Do we want to see them reacting to the news broadcast? Do we just want to have a clean kind of image of the news broadcast? Personally, I think it's kind of nice to get, a little bit of the character in there to show how they're kind of relating to, in this case, the TV broadcast.
Right. And I'd also say, it's advice that I think every artist has heard every time, but it's always a nice reminder, especially if you're starting out. Is yeah, when you're doing the thumbnail stage, it's not just about getting out the perfect version of it's just to get as many iterations as you can. So you kind of really dump your brain on what it is that you're trying to convey because yeah, I'm sure everyone's heard, your first attempt is not usually your best one. And sometimes it is, but you won't know until you try to iterate. So it's just a good reminder for anyone in the thumbnailing stage. It's really not about getting the perfect image. It's just kind of exploring what possibilities are there inside your head and you know
Yeah.
it's a good thing to never forget. So we're gonna go from the thumbnails here and see which we kind of ended up with.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
this is kind of
this is how I would lay out the page before I get into refining the sketches. So, we've got the monorail shot at the top, like we talked about. Then we've got the shot of Midori and Gray as they are, seated inside the scenery. And then we've got the shot of the monitor giving the news. And like I said, I kind of decided to go with not just a clean image of the TV monitor broadcast. I wanted to show the characters below it so we could kind of, connect the news broadcast to the characters as the news is kind of relating to them.
right. Yeah, and you even kind of like just in the simpleness of the thumbnail, you kind of see like it's going on, but like unlike this previous one where like they're both looking at it, it's like they're not even affected by it because they're just so kind of downtrodden in what's happened in the story at this point. So they're not even really phased by what's going on,
Yeah.
which I like. So what's next here? We got composition. So we're gonna talk a little bit about composition. What do we got on that here?
Yeah. So Matt, you've got a couple of yours in the middle. So do you want me to I'll kind of start and then you talk about yours. Does that
Yeah, I
sound
mean,
good?
just give like an overview of like
Yeah.
why we're taking a break to stop from talking about that thumbnail into composition
Well, I like to talk
to
about composition because I feel like that's really one of your first main overarching ends to kind of like the visual storytelling, right? It's kind of like the broadest strokes is where are you putting your characters in the panel? You know, where is our, hypothetical camera? I say camera, I say shots. I'm a storyboard artist, so this is kind of how my brain works. But when I say camera, I guess I'm just like, where are we looking at this from? So for instance, in this first panel here, we have, you know, when you have a really long frame like this, in comics, not only does it, it can imply a length of time, like literally a long panel can actually feel like it takes more time on the page. And here with this long panel, you can see the distance between the characters, it's reflecting the actual distance in their relationship in this moment in this panel. Um, and, obviously you couldn't really get that kind of storytelling feel if they were, say, squished into like a tall panel, or if maybe we were more from the front and seeing Midori walking, maybe she's close to us and Gray's in the background. But here, the idea is not only is there like a physical distance between them, but it's also relaying back this actual like emotional distance between them. Um, Same here, like an interesting way you can kind of Gray here is being cornered by this character. He's literally being backed up into the edge of the frame, and we're cutting closer and closer, and it starts to get a little claustrophobic. So through the composition, you can kind of feel that closing in, right?
right. And you can
Matt?
also when you're doing your thumbnails even be thinking about this just simple block shapes, but you're thinking about like, oh, these two shapes are getting like closer and closer and closer together.
Hmm.
It's in the like I said in the thumbnail stage, you don't even have to put in all that detail. You could just have the emotion that you're trying to convey of getting these characters to get like more and more tense, right?
Hmm.
What do we have? So we have I only have a few panels in here, but so for this is also a wide, but instead of having them kind of running away, like walking away from each other, they're actually kind of in this scene they're running towards something together, but his friend is kind of going faster than he is. So he's trying to catch up, but it's in a bit of a playful mood that I'm going for. So I have a lot of like brighter colors, and even though the characters are far apart, I didn't want them to feel like they were um I guess I didn't want them to feel like they were intentionally being far apart. It's just kind of in the fun of the moment.
Yeah, it's kind of in contrast to the frame that I was talking about first. These characters have a distance between them, but because you can see your character Mark looking over his shoulder at his friend, we do feel that, like, come on, catch up feeling versus, if a character is walking away not looking at him, it feels colder, right?
Right. I'll just talk about the other ones I have down here because they're from the same
Yeah.
scene. So they are currently Mark, who's the character in blue over here, and this is Layden. Mark is trying to convince Layden that they need to go find a spirit because a spirit talked to Mark and told him where to go. And he says, like, don't you think we're a little too old to be playing pretend? So he's throwing up his hands, but like they're having fun, they're kind of dancing around through the forest. And I use this as this framing, they're far away, our main character's far away, and you see like the spirit is watching them. Sometimes you can use this kind of framing to actually have like a feel of like there's like a monster looking over your characters. I mean, I'm sure you've seen those, like the wolf looking at two people through the woods or something.
It's like
But
voyeuristic.
yeah, there's like this kind of voyeuristic effect to it. But I'm actually, if you were to see like the whole comic, I'm kind of transitioning from like this fun moment to like this kind of mysterious and dangerous moment. So I'm shifting the happiness and the colors and everything into this feeling of like they're being watched and you're not really sure what the intention of the spirit is because you can't really understand what he's saying to them. He's just saying, come here, come to this place. And yeah, even here he's like, Mark, where are we going? He's looking happy and they're chasing after each other, but I always have Mark out of the frame because he's kind of like leading the charge. He's running away and Layden's just kind of following along. So that's why I pushed him into the back.
Yeah, he's in such a hurry he couldn't even keep himself in the entire frame.
Yeah.
And then a shot like this, kind
This
of
is a
similar to
color
how,
shot from Centralia. I know the other ones were black and white, but
yeah, the comic since chapter 6 has actually been in color, but similar to Matt's frame down there, you have this foreground element. So in Matt's frame, it is a this spirit is the foreground element, so we kind of get a read of the boys first down there, and then this foreground element of the spirit. And then in this frame, we get the read of the girls sitting here. And the context of this is she's just made this doll flop over with solely the power of her mind. So obviously she's a little bit taken aback by this. So you see the read on the girls first, and you come forward to see this doll that's kind of ominously fallen over, it almost feels a bit imposing the way it's so close in frame to us, the viewer.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
And then
then
over
the last
here,
ones,
you can
let's
also
see.
use, shadow and lighting to enhance your composition and draw attention to certain key moments. So here we've got the key moment of sliding the little friendship bracelet onto the wrist, and the lighting. You can use interesting lighting situations. In this case, the Conix is they're under bleachers, and using that, you can use kind of the light that cuts through like stripes to, highlight the face, the movement of putting the bracelet on the wrist, looking out, to see people playing outside, but you're kind of in this intimate little like fenced in, walled in area, you feel like you're in there with them peering out.
Yeah. There's also the way that this unnatural lighting kind of shows you like they're doing this in secret, like they're kind of hiding away behind these
Yeah.
bars that you see on the side. Like while everyone else is outside playing, they're behind these striped lights that kind of conceal that their friendship is hidden away from everyone else.
Hmm.
And then these are
And then this is
intense.
just, the way you can use, composition. We cut from, we've got these characters here in the foreground. We're looking up at this towering, robotic behemoth creature that's coming at them. And by having a composition where he's much bigger, in frame and towering over them, we feel, small and in danger. And then to cut, this is the view from the creature's eyes. Now we're seeing again, now we're looking down at them. Again, they're feeling very small, very cornered, by cutting to another viewpoint, you can kind of by changing the perspective, well, now we're seeing it through the monster's eyes, and just kind of driving home the danger, elevating the drama in that way.
Yeah. And so we hope that like by showing these, all the different shots, you have like your close-ups, you get your far away shots, your long shots, your environmental shots, all the kind of things that you can use your composition in so many ways to sort of inject, fear or mystery or tension or loneliness, simply just in the shapes of how your panels look and how you choose to place your characters in those panels.
Yeah, and I think our next bit here, we're going to talk about some layouts. Is that right? Yeah.
So we have action pages here.
Yeah, so a bit of layout and in the kind of context of, action pages versus more your dialogue driven pages. So when we're talking about layouts as they, pertain to composition, your action pages, I usually, as a rule, try to keep it under 6 panels, because for your action pages, you want to make sure you've got a lot of room to show this full body acting,
Yeah.
In this third page here, we do have some cut-ins to like her eyes, some close-ups to like a finger twitch for
Yeah.
effect.
I
And
would say like yeah, because you said like 6 panels, but I think if
mhm.
you can put more panels, but they should read really quickly, like
Yeah,
like
so I
these do,
have
right?
it's just like boom, boom, boom. It's 3 small panels. And again, kind of like I said previously about having a very long panel, especially if there's no dialogue, like this one at the third page, that last panel, it's very stark. You almost feel like time stops, if you scroll down, Matt. Yeah, and also by having such a large panel, again, you see the full action, the full body movement of what's happening. You see the space between the characters and how they relate to each other.
Yeah, you really feel the energy like of this page in particular. You feel the energy go from like, there's not even really dialogue. There's like some word bubbles, or I mean, not word bubbles. I mean,
Sound
say
effects, yeah.
sound effects. But you see like the energy. It's going fast, fast, and then she grabs him. It's all going really quickly. But then when you get this long panel, you kind of almost feel like it goes da 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 da, and it slows down into
Yeah.
this. So the reader kind of slowly takes that in, and you can't control the way that someone's going to read a comic, but this is like as a comic creator, your best way to kind of hold, like if you were to say like having a camera on a movie, you can hold the camera and make someone really appreciate a scene, or you can clip from one thing to another. This is kind of the best way that we can control how the reader is absorbing the information. Is whether it's really snappy and fast, or if it's drawn out for a little bit, really makes them think a little bit longer before, say, they turn the page or they scroll down or whatever.
Right. And then do we want to go to the dialogue driven
Sure.
pages on the next one?
I'd say I also really like this one on the right over here that
Mm,
you have where
on the
they're,
left?
sorry, left, yes.
Oh yeah, it's all good.
On the left where she's being chased around this scene. It's three panels, three tall panels though. And since they're not like how we see like wide panels can kind of take a while.
Mm,
If they're, these tall panels, it's like fast. You see how it's just like one image. You really get like the full body movement, but it's just three really fast sessions of movement.
hmm
Um, and then so we're gonna go into, oh, I'm zoomed in. There we go.
Right.
Some
So on the
dialogue.
opposite, with dialogue panels, you can get a lot closer with your camera, so to speak. Because when we've got dialogue and we got talking, you not only like you can put more panels because you've probably got more dialogue to convey. But also, these are going to be more focused usually on the facial acting, you know? That's not to say you don't want any wide shots of the characters, but typically, the further out you are from the character, the less that we, the reader, feel a connection kind of to their emotional state, you know? When you're far out, you're more focused on the physical acting, and when you're close in, like we have this little series of panels here with Midori. We cut in so close that eventually we're all the way up in her face. We can see the sweat, dripping off of her face as she's worried. I would say, my biggest advice to comic artists, when it comes to composing these kind of dialogue pages where we have a lot of characters talking and when we're wanting to stay close to see more of their expressions and emotions, is you do want to have a good mix of more pulled back, wider compositions and more close ones. You want to have that contrast going because I think the problem I see happen a lot is people stay a lot in what you'd call like a medium shot, which is kind of maybe like the waist up, waist to head. And, not that that is a bad shot to use, but if you stay there for too long, it's kind of the medium. I mean, as the name of the shot implies, it's kind of the baseline. So you do want to
Yeah.
make sure you have a good variation of where we can kind of see the characters in their environment, because environment is very important, is how it relates to your character. And also cut in really close to get those kind of, key moments.
Yeah, and I'd say on that point, if you have more contrast, it like is more impactful when you do cut in. The fact that you have
hmm
these kind of pulled out shots makes the pulled in shots more like it stands out more to the reader. If it was all close in the whole time, or if it's all mediums and then you just go in close a little bit, it's not that big of a jump. So it's maybe not reading as like as impactful as it could. Or say if it was all close ins and suddenly there was a wide shot, it would really have a little bit more surprise, like, oh, okay.
hmm
Like you're trying to convey some kind of emotion there. And then another thing that we didn't really touch on quite there, but when you're on one of these pages that has a lot of dialogue, the reader is going to be obviously looking at that panel longer, as opposed to say an action page where they're going through really quickly. So when you have you don't want to spend a lot of time on backgrounds all the time, but when you have a reader really on a panel, I think those are the times when you really have to like be sure to pull in some time to work on those backgrounds and really kind of lay out the area, as opposed to say an action scene where,
Hmm.
you have these, the background kind of becomes a blur because it's not what's important at the moment and
Yeah.
people aren't going to be looking at it quite as long,
Yeah, we
you
want
know?
to, and when it's an action page, it's okay to kind of like the backgrounds fall, to the wayside because, right, we're we're pulling the attention on the physical action.
Yeah. We just want to focus on whatever the action is in an action page. But then in a dialogue page, like I said, the environment's also there with them while they're talking. Like they're existing in a space with
Hmm.
whoever they're having this conversation with, and that environment becomes part of the scene.
Hmm.
Whether it's feeling really close together in this like group shot, or if it's, this kind of stark environment that these characters are in on the right.
Yeah.
I think we can move to the next spot though. I think that's enough on the difference between
Yeah.
those.
So I just wanted to throw in a little thing about how you can really get some unique layouts when you're doing your storytelling. So we've got some kind of unconventional layouts from both my comic and Matt's comic. So from Centralia here on the left, I had the challenge of how do you portray a video in a comic page? So my idea was to show this kind of spiraling, almost like videotape, where each cell of the strip of video, they're like their own little panels. So Matt, if you can kind of zoom in on that a little, we can
Yeah,
see it better. And something I just kind of wanted to go over when it comes to how a page like this can work. When you're making your comic, and I am assuming that most people here are making comics for a, left to right reading audience. Um, so you want to always follow the basic rule of we're going left to right,
top to
top to
bottom.
bottom, and that is going to be the reading order that your reader is going to follow. So even if you have something kind of as strange and unconventional as this page, we still follow the reading of top to right, um, left to right, top to bottom. So even if
Yes.
this third balloon is on the right and not the left, it's above the next one. So you still, as a reader, know where you're going to go next. And that's really important because the last thing we want to do is make your reader guess what the next balloon is or what the next panel is. You
Yeah.
really, the last thing we want to do is pull them out of the story you're telling, and confuse them,
Yeah,
basically.
I've definitely have read, comics where they have like the two word bubbles are the exact same height or they're like right there touching it or even out of place. And then I read
Hmm.
it and I'm like, what is that? And then I have to think for a minute and I have to be like, oh, they mean the one on the left to be read first, but they put the one on the right above the one on the left, and
Hmm.
it can get really confusing. And you see that I did the same thing as Michelle right here, where I have
Yeah.
sort
Zoom
of
in
a
and take us through it.
big flowing shape over here. He's having a daydream, and this is kind of like his representation of that. It's all this stuff that he's seeing, and he doesn't really like know what it is, but it's just all kind of fading into his memory. But, it's still going left to right, top to bottom. And what I do like about what I did here with this is that, you're following this and then slowly it's taking you back to reality. And then you go right, left, bottom. And then over here, you catch his head, you catch the main character's head, and then there's a tail going off the page. I guess something I didn't mention earlier is that Michelle and I do kind of traditional, physical form. We like to think of things as, comic books where you have a page that you open and turn. If you're doing web comics, that's more of a top to bottom, and you would scroll down below.
Well,
But
like a
for this
scrolling
one,
webtoon.
yeah, like a
Yeah, or like a
scrolling
vertical
webtoon or something.
comic.
But since this is a page where this would be on the left or, on the right, uh, it's pulling you to whatever the next page is. It's I think in this particular instance, yeah, this one is on the right, and that tail is telling you that it's coming from the next page. So you're like leading the characters all the way down here and then on to the next page. And it creates a really good flow to have something on the bottom right. Say if you're doing left to right, a bottom right thing that kind of leads you to say, okay, I'm ready to hop to the next page. I'm ready to hop to the next panel, even though it's not on this page. I'm ready to keep going.
Yeah.
And then the thing, same thing Michelle did here. You got like the characters down here at the bottom, and you're gonna move to the next part. But yeah, I think that's I've seen some people do some really interesting compositions that just like completely defy the ways you normally would think of like flat panels and just squares. And the ones that work the best are the ones that, even though they're just like blobs on a page or something, they still follow a certain pattern that doesn't get the reader confused and still conveys the information they mean to convey. So if you're going to do something that's a little more challenging or interesting, or you just want to have fun with it, just make sure that you don't lose someone along the way.
That's right.
All right, what do we got next? Some
Okay.
little stuff about word balloons.
Yeah. So, word balloons or, this is all part of lettering. And I think that another thing I notice sometimes in comic artists is that they treat the lettering a little bit like an afterthought. Um, or maybe they don't really think of how they can use the word balloons to convey the story, like convey the tone or the mood, or, um, sometimes the word balloons might feel a little bit slapped on there and not really placed with the composition in mind. So I always say when you are designing, when you're thumbnailing your panels, your compositions, you want to make sure that you are also designing it with space for the dialogue in mind. So here's just a few examples of different approaches to word balloons. On the left here, this is just a quick example of how you might show two characters having, a back and forth. And again, it's, top to bottom, left to right. So we know who's talking. We're not getting confused of who's saying what first. Generally, it's a good idea to have your first speaker be on the left of
Oops.
your panel, because you don't want to have this weird thing where balloons are,
Yeah,
crossing each other in a strange way.
I think we all do that when we're doing the thumbnail phase and we start writing out the word balloons. You're like, oh no, they're crossing. You can't. That's the thing. You can't cross the word balloons unless it's like
No,
intentional in a way where you like really meant for it to be like confusing on purpose.
true.
But if you like say had him speak first and you put the balloon kind of going over here in front of hers, and then it just kind of it looked really confusing.
Yeah.
This is
That
a
is
really
true
like good
though.
way
You
to
could show a confusing, chaotic conversation on purpose by crossing the balloon tails. But again, if you're gonna do something like that, that is, rule breaking, you gotta do it on purpose and not by accident.
right. Yeah, because you learn they always say you learn your rules so you break them, right?
Yep,
So you know how to
that's
break them
right.
right. This one I always like this panel because it's like this version of Midori. She's like younger, and she kind of is like quietly to herself, like no, and then shouts, come back. And I think it's a really good way of showing that like the first one with the no doesn't even have like a balloon around it because it's so like soft. It's almost you don't even know if she's just saying it to herself or if she's just like mumbling it. But then you can contrast that with this big kind of shock balloon, this big explosion here of come back.
Yeah, this is what
Uh,
we would call a burst
yeah, burst
balloon.
burst balloon.
Yeah. And when you do a burst balloon, it's good to also kind of give your comic balloons a tail that match the energy of the balloon itself. So when I do a burst balloon, I like to give it a little zigzag, jaggy. Here's another one where we've got a very like, raspy, haggard, this character's just been gravely injured. So I wanted to reflect that by giving the balloons, a very like a drippy, like almost like the balloon itself is like bleeding,
Even the
And
outline's kind of rough and like
yeah, and even the text that I use here, I actually changed my normal font like for effect, so it feels even kind of ragged. And then the tail, going to the character is even kind of just like drippy and ragged. And then for this one here at the end, this is typically the kind of boxy frame that I would use for TV broadcasts, anything coming through like a radio, through a phone or something. You usually want to go with basically just kind of a rectangle with some little jaggedy edges.
yeah.
It looks
It
very
feels
similar to a,
robotic or like
yeah.
kind of staticky.
It looks similar to a burst balloon, but like the main difference is it's very boxy.
Yeah. What else do we got here? We got a few more.
Yeah, and then,
Uh
for characters that are whispering to each other, I like to put a balloon that kind of has like a what you say like marching ants, like it's
It's like
it's
dotted
like
line.
dashes, you know. Um, and also it's sometimes, you might want to even make your text inside the balloon a bit smaller than you normally would to kind of
Yeah.
convey that they are speaking in a quieter tone.
I'm gonna talk about this one and then I'm gonna talk
Go
about the
ahead.
middle one. So yeah, this is also she is like very tired. She's been running a lot. Obviously, you see there's blood in her face, so she's
She's
just
had a day.
exhausted. She's kind of like very emotional, kind of like warbly to her voice. So even though like the font's the same, the kind of warble is kind of like on the edge of a normal balloon, but it's kind of faltering, right? So it's kind of like, "Ugh," like
Yeah.
I just can't keep going. And then these two, actually, this one and the one I'm about to show you, these go together. And this is Midori, and there's a whole crowd of people that's around them, as you would see in the previous panel, but they're all kind of yelling just various things that it's not so much about what they're saying, it's more about the fact that they're all talking at once. So you have some of them faded into the background, you have some that are bolder and bigger, some of them are just being cut off the page because like I said, it's not necessarily about what they're saying as much as it's just kind of like the overwhelm
Yeah,
of
and the
all
way
of it at
that
once.
the lettering literally is surrounding the characters, we get a feel for the overwhelming, we feel the surrounding chaos of all these words happening.
And then, after all that, Ren shouts enough. And you just see like that's a way that you can incorporate sound effect or your word balloon with the character themselves to like really show that she's just taking up the whole frame, not just with herself, but like with her words as well. Like it's like cutting through a very stark difference where you're pulled away and they're being surrounded by other people's words, and now it's like she's taking up the environment with what she's saying.
Yeah, it's like you could take this frame and just have her have a little balloon, a burst balloon that says like enough in it in big font, but I to really convey the absolute yelling of this panel. It's literally surrounding her. It's not just enough. It's like, you know.
All right. Yeah. And so I'm just gonna say real quick, we're gonna have if you have any questions, you can put them in the YouTube comments. We'll try to answer all the questions at the end. We'll save some time for that. But for
Yeah.
right now, we've looked at all these kind of like minor pieces of what makes up the panels. So now we're gonna go back to that thumbnail we were looking at before. Oh, actually,
Oh,
whoop, my
we have
bad. We
one
have
little
sound
bit
effects. I
more
forgot.
when we're
Sorry,
talking about
guys.
lettering. It's okay. Yeah, just one more little thing while we're on the subject of lettering is sound effects. I think sound effects are a great way to really just pump up the storytelling. Um, oh, I see. Yuki says not YouTube comments here in Zoom for questions. Okay, so
Oh,
just
sorry.
type them
Zoom.
into
My
the
bad.
Zoom chat. Um, But yeah, again, we're not just kind of drawing an image and then putting text with it. Uh, it's it's even better if you can make, the sound effect or the lettering part of the image. So if you go back up real quick, Matt, like we've got the screeching of the car tires, like literally kind of becoming part of the car. And the font used here, it's jagged, it's abrasive. It kind of conveys the loud squealing of a car braking harshly.
Yeah.
Um,
You could
and
just
then
have like white lines of like, the stuff coming off of it and you just put like little screech, but it doesn't read the same as like it's actually like part of the action itself, which
yeah.
I just think is really like the same for here, like this crash that kind of is cutting between the characters. It's like you see like they're having kind of a relatively, quiet moment and then this crash is like splitting their attention. They're like
Yeah, and it is
caught
also
between it.
literally cutting into the previous frame, you
So
know.
here, and then
Yeah, and even, for this I, put like jagged lines for the edges of their little kind of reaction shots here above and below, just to even really push that jagged, loud abrasiveness of the crash. And then over here you have Midori, she's like panting, she's out of breath. It's so much that again, we kind of have that it's not in a balloon or anything. It's just literally taking up the whole background. You get the feeling that it's just all encompassing, just like
yeah.
panting sound.
Again, this is a really good way of showing like the sound effects can be part of your composition or even like part of your background without having to be like like I said, just like sometimes I've even when I was starting out, I would just put like maybe like little asterisks and say huff huff, but no,
Hmm.
like having it actually involved in there, it makes it more cohesive and
Yeah.
it helps you kind of see what's supposed to be there and all the other stuff is like background information. You can also, I think these four are really good ways of showing that like the sound effects that you use can look like they should sound, which is kind
Hmm.
of a funny thought, but you can use certain aspects of just you know, how we see things and we associate them with sounds that we already know. Like I really always loved this one that you did of the sploosh. It's a cell
Phone
phone
falling in
being
milk.
dropped into cereal,
Rip.
but it looks like the milk and like it's like you can almost hear like the bloop kind of sound that would make.
Yeah, like the splosh looks like it's wet, and then this bang here, it's bloody. It's actually got like viscera, flying off of it, or the buzzing of an incandescent light flickering out, or the very robotic, stiff, kind of sterile beeping of, a security door or something.
Yeah, and that those are like two different contrasts. Like they're both electrical sounds, but we know like this is kind of a old sounds like zzz sound, and the beep is very clear and clean because it's very modern. They're like
Yeah.
opposites of each other. Okay, so yeah, sorry about that. We're gonna go back to the thumbnail now. So with all the stuff that we just talked about, we're gonna see how we're gonna take this and go into the sketch phase. So you can also see that all the stuff we just talked about, even like the composition, that was all considered here in the thumbnailing stage. The composition of the shapes, we're framing in these characters with these large dark shapes. These are our main characters. We kind of use the composition to make them feel claustrophobic. We also made sure to make room for where the dialogue was going to go on the page. That's a really important thing to do in the thumbnail stage before you start sketching because you're going to have to remember there's going to be words on this page. I have to make room for them.
Hmm.
They can't just be an afterthought because otherwise you might cover up some aspect of your composition that you really liked. For example, here you have that thing is talking, the screen is talking. We want to make sure that there's enough room between the two characters' heads and the screen to put that text. So we go into the sketch phase, and do you want to say anything about this, Michelle?
Yeah, just kind of this is, obviously this is where we're refining our initial thumbnails. And again, you're still holding on to that kind of deal, like what is important in this scene? Like what are the core storytelling elements that I need to hold on to? So yeah, we've got all these other people in the car next to them. But we're not going to give them as much detail because our focus is on our two main characters here. And the best way to do that, besides kind of drawing them a little more lightly, is you kind of want to hide faces. You want to obscure people behind things because we as humans, we like to look at faces. So we're gonna zoom in on a face. So if it's really detailed, but it's someone like in the background, you don't want to distract
Yeah,
people
the
to things that aren't.
contrast between having really detailed really detailed main characters, and then the kind of less detailed background characters really helps create that focus for your reader because you want to create that focal
Yeah,
point.
but you
Like
still want to.
here, you have like this lady's cut off, he's cut
Yeah,
off, she has a hat. You know, you want him to be important for the scene, but also you don't want him to be so distracting, right?
exactly. So we can go to the next one.
Yeah. So
Is the
we're finding
ink.
that same idea, using this is the inking. We're using some of that to also make sure like we're inking the main focus points
Yeah, and
more.
using thicker outlines to draw our attention where it matters, using heavy black shapes where we want the eyes to go. It really helps that Gray has black hair, so he instantly is gonna just stand out on his own. Something that sometimes maybe I don't want him to stand out, so you've got to consider how to knock back those darker tones. But yeah, and then the things that are not so are more, second read to our composition, like these people in the background. You're gonna ink them very loosely. You're not gonna put as much details. It's more of a vibe.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean we can't and also just like for your own hand's sake, you don't want
Yeah,
to spend all day long noodling on something that's gonna be like maybe 100 pixels big on someone's phone screen or something. You
and
don't
and
want to.
looked at for 10 seconds.
Yeah,
Yes.
you always have to keep that in mind, like especially with comics, that you're looking at this for a very short time, so you want to put your effort where it counts.
Right.
And
And
so
then,
tone is in
yeah.
this page.
So again, same things. We're gonna put the heavier, darker tones at the front to bring our eyes to the character. We're gonna put the higher contrast. You know, we see Gray down here with his jacket. The contrast on his jacket is very high to kind of bring him to the focus here. Whereas the lighting is more soft. I've even like blurred out a little bit of the background there to kind of downplay it.
Yeah.
Um,
And even though this guy here has like, his hair is also black, I think that the pole being black there and like this kind of side figure being black, it helps keep the, even though like they're high, they're really dark, they don't draw the eye as much as these two do.
mhm.
Yeah. So, let's see. We're gonna talk about color and tone a little bit more. So, as Michelle mentioned earlier, her comic is in black and white in the first 5 chapters and in color. So she can kind of talk about both, whether you're making a black and white comic or a color one. So here's some
Yeah.
tone.
So just some interesting ways that you can also think about, yeah, whether you're doing a black and white comic or you're doing a color comic, you still want to be thinking about how to use like lighting and contrast to tell your story. So, here we've got, Midori is clearly like, highlighted by the windows that she's in front of, and we've got this little wedge of light down here. We're following her eyes as she looks down, and we see the little wedge of light hitting this lunchbox, which she goes to pick up. And then, here, this is what I would call like a very low key tonal composition. Whereas I guess the one up top, yeah, would be much more like more high keyed tones. It's a lot brighter, but this one
Right.
is more like low key where we mostly have very, very dark colors in our composition, but not so dark that they all kind of smush into each other. You still want to be able to, we see the read of the black posts going back in space that draw our eye inwards towards Midori, who is the brightest thing on the page. So, obviously she's going to be the focal point.
But the tone definitely kind of conveys like this sadness. And, of course, the
Yeah.
composition has like so much space up here. But you use those tones, like there's kind of a bit of a mystery to this one with the bright lights, but then there's a bit of a heavy sadness in this one. And
Yeah.
then similarly here, it's a dark room, but there's like lights coming off this window, and it's framing the characters in this space.
And the light itself is also because it's coming through this like old dirty window, the light itself is kind of muted. And you can use the shapes created by shadows to kind of make a very interesting feel for your composition. So the way that the light comes through the windows in this panel and landing on the ground, it almost creates like an imprisoning sort of feel, almost like bars, closing them in, right?
Yeah.
And then here, here's just a little example of how you can you can use contrast to kind of show a quick, tonal or mood change. So here we've got Midori doing a really bad job at cooking. She has no idea what she's doing, but she's taking herself very seriously here. We've got this, dramatic lighting, a dramatic upwards angle. She looks so determined in her eyes. She goes whack, and then we cut shortly. She's kind of burst out of her illusion of being a badass, and we've got this very mundane
Yeah.
gray lighting, to kind of encompass that,
It's
like, oh, oops,
it's a great like story in 3 panels kind of thing. And it really each panel has a different energy to it that tells you everything you need to know without even seeing. That's the thing, is like showing and not telling. It really can
Mhm.
you can use things like composition and lighting and tone, all these things to show people so much more than you could put in just a word bubble. And I think like this last one here is here because of just like you can use the interesting lighting of your environments. Sometimes you just have a fun environment and it just looks really cool. So you can kind of just have fun with that as well and see how that environment's light. Uh, it can be a challenge sometimes to like have certain moods that you're trying to convey if you have a very interesting light source. So you have to kind of think of how you're going to use that light source to your
Yeah.
advantage.
And in this, the context of this, they're doing this like espionage sort of mission. And, you know, by using the lighting of this server room, it gives this kind of like mysterious feeling, like everything's bathed in this kind of bluish green light that makes everything feel a little bit strange, a little bit ominous.
We got about 10 minutes left. I'm gonna just go through. I think we're almost done here, but just
Yeah.
go through these as well.
And then and just a little bit more example on how you can kind of use your lighting to convey the mood of the page. So every example on this page is kind of the same concept of the characters are in shadow while the rest of the environment is lit up. Here, I wanted it to be more of an intimate feeling. So, while everything around them is light, but kind of push to the background. We've got them sitting in this dappled lighting together. It feels I feel like dappled lighting just always kind of adds a little bit of a cool, kind of mysterious vibe to whatever you're working with. And they're sitting under kind of the protection of this tree. So and then we've got their little doll sitting out in the light, but they're kind of secluded in there in the little safe spot
Yeah.
together. Whereas so we have on this second panel here the character, he's sitting miserably in the shadow. Whereas outside, you can see it's quite a nice day for everybody else. But by using the lighting here, we're literally kind of secluding him into his own little misery corner. And to a similar sort of effect, these are panels from the same page, so the mood's kind of the same. But here, this character is sitting in this room. She's gone ruffling through papers and stuff, so you see just detritus everywhere. And the light coming through these windows it's sunrise, but it's that eerie kind of orangey glow of when the sun is just first starting to peek through,
Yeah.
and it gives a very kind of
It's
otherworldly
like a little uneasy.
feel. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a little thing about backgrounds. Michelle is really good at backgrounds.
Thank
So
you.
I just say that because, she does something that I think a lot of people don't always, is that they always want, some people just need to get background out because they just want to get through the story, but the story can actually be conveyed in the background. For example, this one, the character Ren is giving Gray and Midori a tour of their facility. And Michelle wanted to really make sure that this facility didn't just feel like a job place, but it's like a place where people actually live, and they put things on the walls, and like
Yeah. It's
there's all these
community here.
missing, yeah, there's a community, and there's all these missing people that they've been looking for. Well, they have all the missing people posters on the wall, and without saying anything, you see the characters seeing this, and they're like, and taking in the environment, and they look at each other with concern. They're like, oh my God, there's so many missing people.
Hmm.
um
And also, just if I can say real quick about that page, yeah, like I want it to feel like a place where people, even when you're not here and looking at it, there is life going on here. And that's something that I really encourage comic artists to consider, because I think my greatest pet peeve is when I'm reading a webcomic and I feel like the majority of it is happening in some kind of limbo where the background is just like a simple gradient or whatever. And that's fine to do, in my opinion, if you've already set up the space and you have a reason maybe for downplaying the background. Maybe the environment is not important for that frame or that moment. But in general, I think not having backgrounds in your comic for like the majority of pages is a huge missed opportunity to give us the feel of your world. Same for here. This is some exterior shots of the city while some dialogue is going on. And you can see the clutter of the signs, the wet of the pavement, um the
yeah.
kind of awnings in this
It's
city,
it's these you use these for like mood. I mean, this is
Mhm.
like the start of a chapter, so you were setting the mood for what this was going to start out as, and you can use these environments to kind of get your reader in the space of what you're trying to do. Like in this one too, it's like you're driving down a street at 2 a.m. or something, and there's no one out. It's kind of this like loneliness of the city feeling. I don't know if anyone has ever, driven out that late, but there's definitely like a mood that you can capture with just how the backgrounds look with no dialogue at all.
Yeah, just kind of secluded in the darkness except for the street lights, the quiet, the kind of eerie quietness of it all. Um And then, yeah, so here's also an example of how you can use your environment and background to kind of boost your storytelling. Um, we've got Ren here, and she's talking about, she considers this character Forrest like a brother, but she's also lost her, actual biological brother. And, in this frame, we can kind of see them together.
Sorry.
And, she says, if I lose you, I feel like I lose two brothers. And, without having to like point to anything, we, the reader, can get it instantly based off of, things that are in the environment.
And she's like framed by the two people that she's talking about. So, it kind of allows her to say it, but also reinforce it with the environment as well.
Right.
And so I just have like one last little thing here where I say, remember, don't wait to be good enough. That was always the problem I had. I drug my feet for a long time, and I still do sometimes, I'll be honest. But I was unsure that I could even make a comic. So what I did for my story Ruin is instead of like just starting with like the beginning of the story, I picked like an excerpt of something that I think would happen later on in the story. I gave myself a deadline and I gave myself maybe it was like it'd be 6 pages. And so I was like, I think I could do this. I think I could do 6 pages of a comic, just something that seemed achievable as a goal. And I learned a ton just from doing that. I used what I had learned from like reading books, talking to Michelle, because Michelle's my story consultant, and also my comic consultant. She's been doing it longer than I have. So I asked her, what do you think about this? But then I also just tried to rely on myself and prove to myself that I could do it. So I did. I finished a little short. It's a small comic, 6 pages, color, and it tells a really short, simple story. But once I did that, I was like, okay, well, I can do more, and I can do more than that, and I can go on. But if I never started that, I never would, be able to make anything. So that's just to say, even if you don't feel like you're good enough with something yet, uh, what's the thing that you always say is that
The only way to get good at making comics is to make comics.
that's right. And comics really does push or can push every aspect of creating art. I mean, there's story, there's composition, lighting, tone, anatomy, all those kinds of things. And you learn so much about yourself as an artist as well as just learning the craft. So really suggest if you're waiting or you're hesitating to just give it a go, give it your best shot. It'll only get better.
That's right. All right, so again, here is our socials. So if you are viewing this on your desktop, you can grab a picture of our QR code with your phone, or if you just want to screen grab this, it's link.tree/Invelian and link.tree/Micelle draws with a Z for our various socials. But yeah, real quick, I think we can take about 10 minutes here to just do some Q&As for anyone who has questions. Just feel free to drop them in the little Zoom chat. I see we have one already from Choppy who asks, which one do you think is easier, grayscale or full colors? Matt, did you want to answer that first?
It's tough because I think when you're doing grayscale, you really have the ability to like really push the contrast and you're not dealing with color so much. So it's a little easier. I like to do, especially on my thumbnails and my early things, I will block things out in just grayscale because I want to make sure I'm pushing those colors. But color, it's definitely can be more challenging, but at the same time, you can convey more color. Like say, for example, with your comic, Michelle, like you have
Mm.
Midori, she has green hair, but like in grayscale, you can't see that. So it's like
Yes.
one of the aspects of the story is that like just genetically modified people sometimes have like can have their hair be a different color, their eyes can be a different color. That just didn't convey in the black and white.
Hmm.
But then what you did have was that some of your early like compositions were really punchy because that black and white's so easy to kind of it's easier to do that way. So both have their strengths, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and I will just say from my own experience, I started out doing in black and white because I was doing it in Photoshop and I think coloring in Photoshop is miserable. I've switched to Clip Studio Paint, which makes coloring so much easier and faster. Um, but I think that a strength of working in black and white and having, a good skill in that is, yes, you have a really good sense of how to use tone, how to have good contrast, which some people who primarily work in color, sometimes, it might be a little bit lacking in that contrast. Everything might be kind of in the middle. I think it's a good idea, and, I still do this for myself sometimes when working in color, is to have a layer or just desaturate your image real quick or just have a desaturating layer that you can turn on and off just to check and make sure that you're getting, the level of contrast and tone that you're going for and make sure that it's not like two in the middle, you know. And that's not to say everything has to be super high punchy contrast, but you just want to make sure that you're placing your tones so that things read and your colors or your tones or whatever you're using aren't getting too like muddy and samey, like nothing's really standing out, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Contrast is important in all things, so something to
yeah.
consider when you're doing color.
And then
What's our
Belle
next thing?
asks, how do you do the lettering for the sound effects you draw, or do you use pre-made fonts or draw it on your own? So I actually do both. Um, I like to use a website called 1001freefonts.com. The name tells you what you're going to get, but they have a really great catalog of fonts, and they're all sorted by like kind of the type. So sometimes I will use fonts from there. Like for instance,
Sorry, I was actually going to show that like this is one of
oh
those
yeah,
fonts
oh
here
yeah, yeah,
for like the
exactly.
screen, but then this is something that I hand drew. So I made this kind of like electrical zap out of like his power coming out of his hand by
Yeah.
drawing it. But then you can also, that's another example where I could probably maybe improve this with like the tromping sounds. But yeah, or this swoosh is like one that I hand drew in.
Yeah. So I guess it's just kind of depending on what you need in that moment. If there is a existing kind of sound effects font that really like the Bang one, you know, that is a font that I found and it really gets across that, like I said, kind of visceral, you know, being shot kind of vibe. But yeah, like for the splosh of like the milk, like I'm not likely to find exactly what I'm looking for already, like in a font. And also, I wanted to compose it so that it's kind of like part of the frame. So in that case, yes, I will go in and draw it myself.
You can always do a combination of both too. You can find one that really works for
Yes.
you, but then you can even enhance the font, like drawing over it or,
Yeah, I've
adding
done that
effects
before.
and stuff.
Yeah. And then see, Jesse would like to know, do you ever share your work during production to get feedback? And if so, at what stage do you prefer to do it? So these days, I don't usually post my early comic pages for feedback. You know, like I said, me and Matt, we kind of like to, you know, we bounce our work off of each other. So yeah, sometimes I will, you know, be like, hey Matt, like, you know, how do you feel like this page is reading? Or I'm trying to accomplish this. You know, what are your thoughts on that? It's
Yeah,
definitely good to kind of know what feedback you're asking for. Definitely, I would say ask and like I mean it's great for the cartoonist co-op, you know. Obviously we're all artists and it creates such a great environment, a safe place to ask for feedback. I would say when you know when you ask for feedback, you want to ask people who you can trust, like know what you're going for, like, you know, who get it. Um, and you also want to come to them with like it helps to when you're showing your work to others to kind of tell them like maybe what kind of feedback you're looking for. Like, hey,
yeah, yeah.
what do you think of the lettering? I'm trying to do this, or you
Oh
know,
yeah. I mean, I actually have quite a bit to say about this because I
yeah,
think
go
that
ahead.
what really that question comes down to is it's a matter of confidence really. And like, I used to always like I would draw stuff and I felt so unsure of myself that like I wasn't sure that anything I was doing was right. So I would just kind of post to the void and be like, what do y'all think about this? And not really say exactly what I was looking for or like what kind of advice I really wanted. I think like what I really wanted was someone to give me some kind of affirmation that like I'm doing something right. But you know, you have to know what you're asking for. Like Michelle said, you have to ask like, well, right now I'm focusing on anatomy. So does this hand look right? Does it look okay enough in a comic? Or am I, the lettering. How could I improve the lettering? But if you just go there and you say, I'm working on this page, could someone give me some advice? You're kind of leaving yourself open to get criticisms that you might not even been expecting. Maybe you thought that maybe you in your head, you thought all my colors are just where I want them. And then because you just asked for feedback, someone's gonna come and say, like, I don't really like the colors. And now you're like questioning yourself. So you should get things to a place where you feel confident with it enough and you feel happy with what you've made, but maybe you would like some feedback. be sure that you know what you're asking for when you ask for it. Because yeah, I mean, I've fallen into that space of like, oh, I asked for some feedback. Someone told me something that I wasn't even thinking about, and now I'm just obsessing over this one thing, and it's just not healthy to do that. You know,
It's true.
you need to build some confidence in yourself, and also give yourself the grace of like, well, I know this isn't as good as I want it to be, but it's good enough for now, and I can move
Yeah.
forward. Even if someone says it'd be nice if your faces had a little more expression. It's like, yeah, it would be nice. I don't have that right now, and that's okay. But I want to know how to improve the lighting or something, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's not to say, only listen to the feedback you like.
No,
It's
no,
just
no.
more to say, it's just more to say, like, you want to ask the right people for feedback. You want to ask people who understand what you're going for, because I've definitely heard people say, like, I asked for feedback from someone who did a completely different discipline for me, or they were more experienced in a completely different kind of
Oh yeah.
genre or tone or whatever. And they're going to give advice based on what they know and what they do. And as a result, sometimes people might hear something in it and they feel discouraged, but it can just be a matter of a mismatch,
Yeah.
of creators.
Yeah, just to keep it short, I heard the story. Someone said that they once went to like a CTN or one of those kind of like art things, and they asked for a portfolio review from three different people who work in three different departments, and they all gave them three different pieces of advice that were wildly
Yes,
different. It's because, like I said, you have to know what you're trying to do.
exactly. And then just what stage you prefer to ask for feedback. I mean that really depends on where you're looking for feedback. If it's on composition, then I would definitely be asking for feedback during the early rough sketch stage, You don't want to wait too long to ask for feedback on things that if you have to go and fix them, it's going to be like a huge pain in the butt. And then Belle asked, do you ever change character proportions to fit the composition? Like someone who is 6 heads tall, you make them shorter. Like how important is consistency versus readability? So, I mean, I think I mean, if you're going for like a surreal kind of story, or maybe like the kind of, sometimes in anime styles, characters might completely change style just to get a feeling across. They might go from a realistic character to a little chibi. That's one thing. The kind of story that I tell doesn't really have those like extreme style changes. So I would say if you have to change the character's proportions to fit the composition, I would say that you need to retool what the composition is. Because if you are having to change things to make it fit rather than making a change because it's part of the plan, it's intentional, that's, yeah, I guess to rephrase that, you don't want to make artistic decisions um, because you have to like cram them in there, like as a result of maybe like not planning it enough. If a
Right.
character is shorter, and like I said, it's not one of those like style change things, you just, oh, they wouldn't fit in the panel. It's just gonna look a little bit off. And at that point, I would just say, well, maybe what this frame doesn't need is to squeeze people down. Maybe what we need is to pull our camera back more and give
Yeah.
more space for that character to be in there,
Yeah.
if we're trying to fit the whole character in the frame.
And when you say pull a camera back, I think that like another way of thinking about that is kind of like, because how whenever I'm having to do that is that you have a specific space, like you're trying to fit these characters into this square. Say you had like dialogue here and it felt really cramped. The bet you're just gonna have to take your characters and select them and shrink them down. Just
Sometimes.
give more space for them to breathe, or something, because if you're trying to like make something fit, it's often because you didn't leave enough room to really put everything you wanted to in that
Yeah,
page.
I think we've all had that experience when drawing in a sketchbook. You're doing a drawing and you realize, oops, I drew this too close to the edge. And I think we've
Yeah.
all had the thing where like, well, maybe I'll just draw their arms and legs getting smaller. But that's,
Yeah.
again, it's like what I'm saying is it's not a choice that you're making intentionally to get a
Yeah.
story point across. It's a consequence of not planning it. So
Yeah, I did that
yeah,
the other day. I did a self-portrait, and I ran out of room for my legs, so I drew myself with tiny legs and just
Oh
left
my
it.
God. But yeah, if you're always fighting for things to fit in panels, I would say, if you're going to resize things, you want to do that at the layout stage when you're doing your thumbnails.
Hmm.
That's where you can grab characters, shrink them down and stuff. You don't want to be finding yourself in that situation when you've already drawn the whole picture. That's gonna be a nightmare.
And on that note too, I think when there's this kind of like in between phase between thumbnail and sketch where you're kind of like doing both. You did your thumbnail and now you're sketching and that's when you're kind of seeing like, oh, I need to resize these people. I need to move things
Yeah.
around a little bit. So you're not just like getting the perfect thumbnail and then sketching over it to get the perfect image. You're kind of tooling it back and forth the whole time
Yeah.
till the characters really do fit like you want them to.
And that's why I say also do your lettering when you're doing your thumbnails like this. So you make sure you've got room for everything. Because when I did my first chapter of Centralia, I thought I could just guess how much room to leave for word
Mm,
balloons. And yeah, guess what? I didn't.
yeah.
And that first chapter, there's definitely panels where I'm like, ugh, like it's clear that I didn't leave that space in
Lettering
mind.
is absolutely the secret, like it'll bite you if you don't know anything about it kind of thing. It just always, oh, I put the words too close to the center, or just they don't look right, or it's hurting the composition somehow. It's because it's just as important as like drawing the characters. Do we have
Yeah.
time for any more?
Yeah. Are there any more questions from anyone? Matt, did you want to just pop it back to the socials
Yeah,
page in case anyone still wanted to grab those?
absolutely.
I think we have time if anyone has one more
Yeah.
question.
Well, in the meantime, if anyone has anything else, just really want to say thank you for coming today and watching us do this. We've done this panel a few places before, and always happy to, meet with artists of all different skill levels and just I even like to meet people who are better than me and I can learn from as
Of
well. And I hope
course.
that there's like some little stuff here that maybe even if you feel like really established, there's something here that kind of reminded you of, oh yeah, I should really pay more attention to that, or oh, I never saw it that way before. So yeah, you can always
Yeah.
message us afterwards, send us a direct message on Blue Sky or Instagram, whichever is your favorite. Not Tumblr because I don't check that one.
Yeah, I'm mostly stalking around on Blue Sky. So I'm always looking for more comic moots. So yeah, I'm always happy to find new cool comics. So yeah, give me a shout. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for the tech help. Thank you so much, Yuki, for hosting. This has been a lot of fun. And I hope that I will see y'all around on the web. And I will also try to poke my head into the co-op Discord more often.
Yeah, same. We're done planning a whole bunch of big events we were doing before where we were kind of like limited capacity for things. So I'm trying to like be better on socials.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, see y'all around on the
Yeah.
web. And yeah, if you aren't a member of the co-op yet and want to join a community can part of your journey, yeah, definitely check out the Cartoonist Co-op because they've got all the awesome resources and community and just everything that it's such a wonderful resource and I'm just so happy to be a part of it. So please, 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 it doesn't matter what comic level you're at. The comic co-op is an amazing resource. But yeah, that's it from me. So everyone enjoy the rest of your Sunday and thanks for having us.